Welcome to the May 1st, 2017 meeting of the Pacifica Planning Commission. I guess we'll start with a roll call, please.
Commissioner Behringer.
Present.
Commissioner Evans.
Present.
Vice Chair Cooper.
Here.
Chair Niblin.
Here.
Commissioner Campbell.
Here.
Commissioner Gordon.
Here.
Commissioner Clifford.
Present.
Great. Commissioner Gordon, could you lead us in a salute to the flag?
Sure.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great, thank you. I guess we'll move then on to administrative business. The first item we have is the approval of order of the agenda. Let's see here. I guess that's Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah, I'll move that we approve the order of agenda.
Commissioner Cooper.
Second motion.
Excellent.
I had one question
Please, go ahead.
on packet page 13, about almost halfway down. Associate Planner Murdoch, didn't think that they were in that situation?
Okay, are we talking about the minutes?
Excuse me,
Okay, well, it sounds like we're going to have some comments on the minutes, but why don't we go ahead then and vote on the approval of the order of the agenda?
Oh, yes, wrong button.
Okay, that was unanimously approved. Thank you.
Chair, I'm going not to be voting on the minutes as I was not here last meeting.
Okay, so with one abstention then, Commissioner Evans, thank you. That'll take us then to approval of the minutes. These are the minutes of the April 17th, 2017 meeting. It sounds to me like, well, we have at least some comments, so I'll start with Commissioner Clifford.
Okay, now, like I say, about just about halfway down is Associate Planner Murdoch didn't think that they were in that situation. He stated that the log, and I thought maybe that meant that was supposed to be law, not log.
Folks on staff seeing where the comments.
That's my recollection of
Okay,
that statement
excellent.
as well.
So we'll note that correction then. Any other comments or corrections? Let's see, Commissioner Cooper.
I move that we approve the minutes of April 17th.
Actually, I had just a couple of comments myself. I'm sorry. I was just holding off until other folks did. On page 14, at the very last paragraph on page 14, there's a comment that's attributed to me. I think this was Commissioner Cooper's comment. This had to do with prohibiting short-term rentals and stressing, well, it says what it says, but it looked to me like a comment in support of allowing short-term rentals. I think that was Commissioner Cooper's comment.
That was my comment. I was in support of it.
And I don't believe I was. And then going from there are a number of comments that are attributed to the second paragraph on packet page 15. I think there's a comment attributed to Commissioner Cooper that may well have been mine. This was my comment, agreeing that they should not be billing. I actually think that's building ADUs and then renting out for the reasons stated. So I think we just got people's comments reversed there. That was my comment. And then from there are a number of comments that are attributed to me that I think were Commissioner Cooper's. At that point in the proceedings, Commissioner Cooper, I think, was sort of leading the conversation. And again, on the balance of page 15, I think references to me probably should be references to Commissioner Cooper. And I think this carries on the next page where comments are attributed to me that were Commissioner Cooper's, and then comments that were mine were attributed to Commissioner Cooper. I guess our voices are similar.
I'm trying to copy your
And so specifically on page 16, the second paragraph, again, it says Vice Chair Niblin stated that the last one requires replacement of covered off-street parking. I believe that was Commissioner Cooper's comment. The next reference to Vice Chair Niblin suggests that they say require owner occupancy of primary dwelling unit, period. Again, I think that was Commissioner Cooper's comment. The next reference, a couple paragraphs down to Commissioner Cooper, I think was my comment. Same with the last reference to Commissioner Cooper on page 16 of the packet. Do you agree that those were your comments?
I would just have to look at the video. I don't have a memory like that.
We can bring these back.
I think that'd be good. Again, I just want the record to be clear on who said what.
Sure. I'll withdraw my motion then.
Thank you. Commissioner Behringer?
I was going to second the motion, but since it's withdrawn, it's academic.
Thank you. Looks like a designation of liaison to the City Council meeting for May 22nd, 2017. This is regarding the 1567 Beach Boulevard permit extension. Commissioner Clifford has already graciously volunteered to cover this. Do we need to discuss this any further?
No, it's just there for a reminder.
Thank you. Okay, so we've reached the part of our agenda reserved for oral communications, and this portion of the agenda is available to the public to address the Planning Commission on any issue within the subject matter jurisdiction of the Commission that is not on the agenda. The time allowed for any speaker will be 3 minutes. Looks like we may have a card making its way here. Cheryl King. Oh, I'm sorry, this is for a study session item. Do we have anybody who wants to speak to the Commission on the oral communications portion of the agenda? Okay, seeing no one, I guess we'll move on then to consent items, of which we have none, which then takes us to new public hearings. We have a use permit UP 08117, which was filed by the applicant Jenny 1 of Modus for replacement of 6 relocated antenna and 3 additional antenna contained within a new 10-foot long, 7-foot wide by 11-foot tall enclosure at roof level at 5550 Coast Highway, APN 023072070. Recommended California Environmental Quality Act status exempt. I note this application has been withdrawn, so does that remain the case? We don't need to hear this tonight?
Right, that's correct. It was put on the agenda because it was noticed, but it has been withdrawn since.
Thank you. All right. Which then will take us to our consideration item, which is adoption of a resolution determining that the 2017 to 2022 capital improvement program is consistent with the general plan and local coastal use plan. The recommended CEQA action on this matter is exempt, and the recommended action is to adopt the resolution determining that the proposed 2017 to 2022 capital improvement program is consistent with the general plan and the LCLUP. Can we get a staff report on this item?
Yes. Good evening, Chair Niblin and Commissioners. I am Assistant Planner Bonnie O'Connor. Each year, the City Council is asked to adopt a 5-year capital improvement program, or CIP, which comprises the known capital projects on the horizon. However, not every project is funded or scheduled to be completed within the next fiscal years. The Planning Commission's role in the CIP adoption is determining its consistency with the city's general plan and local coastal land use plan. The Planning Commission's role does not extend to the project's priorities or funding. In the 2017-2022 CIP before you this evening, a majority of the projects have been carried over from previous years. There are 21 new projects. The commissioners were provided the CIP, a list of new projects, and a brief summary of the project's general plan and local coastal land use plan consistency. The engineering and wastewater department are present to help answer any questions. It is recommended that Planning Commission adopt the attached resolution finding that the 2017-2022 capital improvement program is consistent with the general plan and local coastal land use plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from commissioners for staff regarding this item? Excellent. Okay, no questions. I guess then it'd be appropriate to open the public comment or the public hearing portion of this matter. I don't have any speaker cards. I'll just double check and see whether or not there are any members of the public who want to speak to this item. And I don't see any, which I think then we'll go ahead and close the public comment portion of the agenda as to this item and bring it back to the commission. Do we have any comments or deliberation from the commissioners on this item? Commissioner Clifford.
Well, the only comment I have is the charts that are in here are really, really small font. And I was hoping that the next time this comes forward, if it's at all possible to enlarge the font to make it more readable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, any other deliberation regarding this matter? Commissioner Behringer.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just one quick question for staff. If we approve this evening, Is this in essence waiving any future comments that we may have on these projects if in fact they're funded and go forward? Is this our one and only chance to discuss them? I guess that's my question.
You're only making a determination of the general plan consistency,
Yes.
and so you're not, I guess, waiving any right to make further comment on the project.
It'd be kind of awkward, though, if we tried to assert that it really wasn't later if we had a hearing, though, right? So I guess we're just relying on staff on this because I haven't really delved into whether these are all consistent with the general plan. They appear to be, and you make the case for them to be, but we're not really going to. I don't think you expect us to take a deep dive on every one of these and talk about them tonight, do you?
No, I expect you to rely on staff to do that, and we did do our research and
Okay.
and checked on especially the new programs this year.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I had one question in regards, I know we talked about the Rockaway Beach in lieu of parking fees. Why wouldn't we expand those to other regions of the city that have issues with parking? I mean, we have parking issues down in Palmetto. Why wouldn't we expand those to other areas?
We've talked about that internally, and we need to do a parking study and fee study. And so it's not necessarily just transferable to a different area of town, but it is something that we've discussed and may be coming forward in the future.
With future, okay. And then do we, have we ever, we put parking meters in over at the beach in Lindemar. Have we thought about putting other meters in as we get, more and more parking and more businesses within the city, putting parking meters in, like say in Rockaway or anywhere down in that area?
Well, I can say that I'm not sure. So there's the demand issue, and I'm not sure if we're there yet.
Okay.
And there's also a sensitivity that the Coastal Commission has on visitor serving parking, and so I know that was a process to go through to get Lindemar paid parking. And so I would just say that we can talk about that in the future, but there's several steps that need to be gone through first.
Okay.
Agree.
Any other comments at this point? Okay, well, I think then a motion would be in order. Commissioner Gordon?
Sir, I'll move that the Planning Commission adopt the resolution included in Attachment A, finding that the proposed 2017 to 2022 capital improvement program is consistent with the general plan and the local coastal land use plan.
Thank you. Commissioner Evans?
I'll second that.
All right, we've got a motion to second. Why don't we go ahead and vote? Okay, unanimously approved. Thank you. Okay, well, that takes us then to the study session portion of our agenda. We've got a study session on text amendment TA 10617, initiated by the City of Pacifica to discuss methods to regulate the location of marijuana businesses and related activities. The text amendment to be discussed would affect property citywide. A study session allows the Planning Commission to receive input from the public and provide direction to staff regarding this future text amendment. The study session is open to the public, although it is not a public hearing, and the Planning Commission will take no formal action. And the goal here is to provide direction to staff. Could we get a staff report then?
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm Associate Planner Christian Murdoch. This evening, we are conducting a study session to discuss one aspect of the city's marijuana regulations, methods the city may use to control the locations of marijuana businesses and related activities. The feedback received from the Commission this evening will help staff to develop the broader ordinance regulating land use, licensing, and other aspects of marijuana businesses and related activities. The City held a joint study session with the City Council and Planning Commission on March 6, 2017, at which time staff received feedback on a number of topics related to marijuana regulation. Pertinent to our study session this evening, the feedback included interest in permitting and regulating several types of marijuana businesses and activities. These included medical marijuana dispensaries, non-medical marijuana retailers, manufacturing facilities, testing facilities, and outdoor cultivation for personal use on residential properties. The diversity of the businesses to be regulated may call for differing approaches in terms of determining their locations. Some may be most appropriate in retail centers, others in professional offices, and still others in industrial areas. In all cases, state law contains a minimum buffer of 600 feet from kindergarten through grade 12 schools, daycare centers, and youth centers. With respect to outdoor personal cultivation, It would occur within residential zones, but it may be appropriate to consider the proximity to sensitive uses such as schools, as well as require certain measures to screen or secure properties where cultivation is occurring. Staff has provided a list of tools the Commission may consider using to regulate locations of marijuana businesses and outdoor cultivation for personal use, along with a set of recommendations for how these tools may be used individually or in concert with others to provide the desired level of control over them. We look forward to receiving the Commission's feedback and hope the questions included in the staff report will help guide the Commission's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions at this point from commissioners with respect to the staff report or the staff presentation here? Okay.
I have just one.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, I was noticing on the daycare centers, and I know we have a lot of them in town, were they specified in this map?
So I've made every attempt to include the daycare centers that would be subject to the 600-foot buffer in the map. I cannot assure you I've captured all of them at this point. Not all of them are well advertised. It would require a more extensive research process to look into state licensing and so forth to ensure we had 100% accountability on the map. What this map does not include, however, are family daycare homes. So those within single-family homes, for example, within residential neighborhoods. The state law exempts those from the 600-foot buffer.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gordon.
Sure, thanks. First, I wanted to commend staff on, the staff report was awesome on this point. It was just so well organized and so helpful. I really appreciated it. And I had a question about, in terms of the buffer zone, I got the sense that there was a concern that if we expanded it to 1,000 feet from the 600 feet, that's the baseline from state law, is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we expanded to 1,000 feet, that would be somewhat problematic in terms of basically kind of zeroing out the available commercial properties that could host the medical, I mean, not the medical, but the various marijuana facilities that we're talking about. That's my understanding?
That's generally the sense, yes. The buffers, given the city's development pattern, are already difficult but manageable. To increase them or to add other uses to the list of buffered uses, depending on the uses selected and the buffer selected, could rule out nearly all existing commercial areas.
Okay. And I had one other question, and that was in terms of our approach to regulating it. It sounded like you were recommending that we either amend the existing zoning districts, the commercial ones, the C1 and C2, along with a discretionary permit, or using an overlay zone and along with a discretionary permit. That's my understanding, right? Is that right?
That's correct for dispensaries and retail locations. There are other business types that recommended different methods.
I'm sorry, I meant to limit it to dispensaries and retail places. So in terms of recommending one or another, do you see pros and cons?
I think for purposes of most careful control over the location and numbers, overlay zone is probably the preferable alternative.
Because that gives a focus on the different the geographical area that we're talking about.
We can define not only the geographic boundaries, but also the specific standards within that zone. If we were to amend the C1 or C2 zone, for example, to allow dispensaries as a conditional use, for instance, it would be more difficult to carve out specific standards for dispensaries and retail marijuana outlets, because those are general zoning districts that apply throughout the city to various different classes or types of businesses. So to have the most precise regulation of them, I think we would agree that overlay zones would probably be the best approach.
Thanks.
Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. There was one distinction that I brought out during the planning session that's not contained in here, and that's the difference between manufacturing and processing. There's one that processes the marijuana into a product that you could use in a cannabis product, say a brownie or maybe a facial product or whatnot, which is a lot different than the processing facility, which really is using the solvents and really processing the product, and which are two totally different activities. And I think it's an important distinction to make in here, because they are regulated differently within the state environment, as well as I think within our ordinance they should be definitely contained. I think that there should be a separation between the two. The other one that I think we talked about in this previous planning session was the delivery services, and I didn't see any type of discussion in here in regards to delivery. So if you could address the first one, I think it's important, and then there's maybe the second one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's manufacturing generally, right, which includes that.
Yeah, so Chris and I were just discussing, we're actually not aware of the processing license. I'm actually looking at the list of MCRSA and AUMA licenses right now, and there are two different kinds of manufacturing licenses, but I'm not aware of a processing license.
Okay. The difference really is if you had a product, you wanted to make chocolate or you wanted to make brownies. That's an entirely different business than taking in a bulk amount of marijuana and processing it to a refined type of product.
Right.
So, I attended a conference where they were two totally different conferences. And so I think it was important because one really was a dangerous type of facility, and it did expose people to a lot of either compounds or CO2 or any of those other products and emissions, compared to someone else who gets that concentrated product and is making a brownie or is making a popsicle or whatever it might be. And so I think that making that distinction within this ordinance is going to be really important, because I don't want to defer. I mean, if someone wants to, like, our bakery wants to do something with a product, they should. I mean, it's a totally different regulation, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Christian.
I think we certainly understood that distinction from the study session. I think at this point where we are with the study session here tonight, it wasn't clear to us necessarily how to best draw that line. As Neera indicated, there's not a separate license type we're aware of to draw that distinction from the state licensing standpoint. I think certainly we'll take this feedback again and evaluate whether we think we can carve out a subset of the state license type through the local zoning standards, and whether that would be an advisable approach or not.
Okay, I'll look real quick on my phone and see if I can find the other one. And did we ever address the delivery portion of it? I mean, we had talked about, I think I had asked a question whether or not an outside dispensary or service could deliver within the city of Pacifica, and I think that it was said yes, they could. I think if we wanted our own delivery service within Pacifica, they actually had to be tied to a dispensary.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, the delivery component under the state laws, both for medical and non-medical, incorporates delivery into a retailer or a dispensary. There is no separate license for a delivery. And the
Okay.
direction that staff received, I believe, was that the commission and the council intended to keep it that way, to have vertically integrated delivery services only.
Okay, great. That's all the
And
questions I
then,
have.
Commissioner Cooper, if I
Yes.
might just add, the two types of manufacturing licenses that exist for medical and non-medical, one involves the use of volatile solvents and one does not. My understanding from talking to some practitioners means that the products that can be created with non-volatile substances involve baking and those sorts of processes. And we can certainly write that into our ordinance to limit the scope of what can be manufactured with non-volatile solvents.
I just wonder, I think there's a big process with CO2 processing of marijuana, and would you consider that a volatile or non-volatile substance? And it's really considered non-volatile because it doesn't use a carcinogen of sorts. But then again, it does pose a real environmental health impact by releasing that much CO2 into the air without any other type of regulation. So I just think they're two different types of facilities. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Commissioner Campbell.
No, my question just got answered. This is Commissioner Cooper's.
Thank you. Commissioner Behringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question, in terms of the types of zoning approaches that we're going to take on this. And I think all of them are good. I tend to like the buffer radius because I think you can keep the traditional approach to how we approve things within that context. I think it gets a lot more complicated when you try to do overlays or new zoning districts. But one of the concerns that I had was that I think it's important that we use a conditional use permit for whatever, zoning context we create. And we had talked about this in the study session. I think it might make sense to have a short term, have a time element on the conditional use permit. Other jurisdictions do that. And maybe it's 5 or 10 years, so that at the end of 5 years that they have to come back in and apply again for a conditional use permit, so that if there is a history of marginal behavior, we can deal with it at that time, rather than having it run till they decide they don't want to do it anymore, or they do something really egregious and then we can shut them down. I don't see that in here, and I'm wondering if we could possibly incorporate that in.
So part of the reason why you don't see it in there is because this report focused on the locational criteria, and when we come back in 2 weeks, we're going to have the complete draft ordinance in front of you.
First of all, I love the map. I know without having access to GIS software, this was pretty complicated to do. Christian, good job on that. In terms of the radius, are we okay if we wanted to go with 1,000 feet? Are we on firm ground with that, if we want to do that?
Yes, the state law provides that municipalities, local agencies can establish a different buffer, including a greater buffer or recommend a lesser buffer. We have not recommended in our report to increase the buffer, as you'll read, but it is within the city's authority to do so.
It seems the 1,000-foot seems to more substantially impact the back of the valley commercial locations potentially, but they're also hit by the 600-foot buffer pretty strongly. So that was really the only area, if you look at the map, that seems to be substantially impacted. The rest of the commercial areas seem to provide some opportunities for this type of use within the commercial zone.
Well, it would rule out the majority of the Fairmont Shopping Center as well to go to a 1,000-foot buffer.
True. Anything else?
That's enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Clifford.
My question is that once these buffers are established and a business is actually located inside of one of, just outside of one, what happens if a daycare, a school, a youth facility wants to open up in that area? Does the store get grandfathered? Does the store have to go away? Does the school get denied?
So the buffer, as it's defined in state law, is those businesses in effect, or those sensitive uses in effect in existence at the time the license is issued. And so should the marijuana business open and obtain a license, and then a sensitive buffered use open up within the buffer, it would not affect their ability to get the license or to renew the license. We could address it differently in the city's standards to have some other process that comes into effect. We haven't defined what that would be. I think we would prefer to not create a bunch of nonconformities or have actions outside of the control of the business affect their ability to go on as an ongoing concern. But we certainly have discretion to write that into our ordinance.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you. So my question for staff related to the outdoor personal cultivation section. And I noticed that you were recommending requiring that, and I'm on page 212 of the packet, that any residential property cultivating marijuana outdoors should cultivate the marijuana in the rear yard and have a 6-foot solid fence with a self-closing locking gate with an alarm. And then in parentheses, it says similar to properties with pools or spas. And my question was, were you referencing pools and spas because that's a requirement, or because just to give us an idea of, imagine a pool or a spa with a gate and an alarm, blah, blah, blah?
It was really more so to indicate that there's an existing standard for that, a pool barrier requirement.
So there is, huh?
Yes.
So if I wanted to have are we talking about a commercial or even for residential?
Residential.
So if I wanted to put a hot tub in my backyard, I'm required to put a gate around it with an alarm?
A hot tub, I believe so, but certainly for an in-ground pool, for example, is a safety precaution.
So for a pool, you would be required to put a gate and an alarm?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I have one more question, and I did look at the state license, and I didn't see any distinction either. I just, at the conference, there was a big distinction between the things. The other question I have is, I have noticed in other cities, the very obnoxious dispensaries, all green, illuminating, so you could see it 3,000 miles away. Is there any restrictions on stuff like that we can put in our code so we don't have that type of visual problem?
I'm not aware of anything that would limit us from having a design review component to the discretionary permit process. Are there other restrictions on signage in state law? Okay. And so that's something that we could write in if that's a concern for the commission.
That and this the signage in general. I just know, as much as I want people to understand where the dispensaries are, they have to go hunt for them. We don't need a beacon out there either. And I have noticed that there are dispensaries that are beaconish that don't really pertain to it. The other question I had was just looking at this buffer zone map, and I guess there's exceptions to some of this. And, if you look at where the elementary school is on Manor, and then there's a freeway, and then you have the other shopping center on the other side. It doesn't seem that other shopping center is related to where the school is, but it's still, since the freeway's there, it kind of flows within that boundary. Is there exceptions to that rule if they came in front of the Planning Commission, or is it all steadfast? Boom, you can't put any dispensary there.
Well, state law does not provide any distinction if there's a significant barrier to movement or visibility or anything. It's a strict 600-foot buffer.
Okay.
We could attempt to craft a different standard. I'd have to consult with.
I was just more curious than whatnot. I don't have I'm not opposed to it. I just thought in certain cases there might be in a situation where it wouldn't apply, the buffer wouldn't apply, but that's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Campbell.
Yeah, in the staff report on page 2 and 3, we talk about how the buffer could be used by unscrupulous operators of marijuana businesses to, I guess, crowd each other out. Do we have the latitude to say that, or make a distinction between retail facilities and let's say a testing facility, or is it just a blanket? If you owned a retail facility, you can't open a manufacturer or a testing facility within 600 feet. Is it all like that?
So the reference to the unscrupulous operator boxing out other businesses, if you will, was mentioned in the context of including a business-to-business separation, right, as opposed to the 600-foot minimum buffer from sensitive uses.
Right.
And so if the commission were to support a business-to-business buffer, I don't see any reason why we couldn't have distinctions, make it apples to apples. So dispensary to dispensary, retail to retail, testing facility to testing facility, since the anticipated impacts are different, and there may not be a strong basis to exclude a testing facility near a dispensary, for example. I think we have that latitude.
Great, thank you.
Commissioner Behringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, because I know it was discussed in the joint study session, but we didn't vote on it, is that I assume by the way you've structured this that we are not proceeding with any agricultural grow areas in terms of this ordinance. So are you going to expressly prohibit it, or are you going to be silent on it? How are you going to proceed on it?
The guidance that I took from the study session with the City Council and Planning Commission was that outdoor commercial cultivation or indoor commercial cultivation were not of interest at this time, and that they should be prohibited.
Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I had one last question. One of the elements that came up pretty significantly was these business plans of the dispensaries and how they address security, how they address safety, how do they address their employee safety, how do they address stock. how is that really regulated in the city for someone to actually evaluate that? I mean, once they've submitted this plan, they might say, well, I submitted the security plan. And you're like, well, yeah, but it wasn't an security plan that I think that is reasonable. I mean, how is that really done in the city?
So in addition to the land use regulations, there's going to be a licensing regulation that's run through the police department. So that'll be in a different section of the municipal code. And those, the police department will get into the weeds in terms of whether or not, the business plan.
Well stated.
Security measures, where their cameras are located, how long they need to keep the film, and then they'll be doing inspections and also requiring a renewal annually and fingerprinting the employees. And the police chief is here if you wanted to ask him questions. I know it's not, the drafting isn't complete yet, but he has a pretty good idea of what he would require. So the city will have basically multiple layers of regulation. So the planning commission will be involved in location, place, time, manner, and then the police department will be issuing licensing.
Can we make those, the permits for the land use expire more rapidly than what we do for, say, a building permit? Because what I don't want someone is getting an entitlement to a piece of a property and then kind of mess around with their submission of their plans, and they submit a really lousy plan and it just drags on and on and on. Can we say, hey, you have to have, once we give this, you have to operate within a certain period of time, or you have to obtain the approvals from the police department in a certain period of time?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable, and we can work that into the regulations. And I will also add, I know this isn't what you were getting at, but I will also add that both permits are going to be contingent on each other, right? So you can't the police won't issue their license without the use permit. The use permit, one of the conditions is they get their license. So there'll be some connection there as well.
I guess as a commissioner, I get a little nervous on the licensing portion of it, even though it's not in our purview, just because we allow businesses to operate now, and I haven't seen any plan. I'm not sure that they've done any permit process. And so what makes that process more diligent in the future once we enact these provisions compared to where we are now? So it concerns me that we're not following through currently, and what would make us follow through in the future. So I get a little concerned.
Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. My question is back to the buffer map. And I'm curious about what the impact is if the buffer partially cuts off a shopping center. Does that mean that the entire shopping center is off limits? Or like, let's be more specific. Let's take, for example, Eureka Square. And let's assume that we were going to go with the 1,000 foot buffer zone, the light blue color. I see that cuts off the Eureka Square shopping center kind of in half. Does that mean that the one half, the elongated portion, is off limits, but the portion, for example, that's got Oceana Market and such is okay? Or is the entire shopping center off limits because the buffer zone extends to a part of it?
I'm not aware of the state law defining that distinction. I think it would be up to the Planning Commission to make a recommendation either way. I'll offer that from a staff perspective, the resolution that we can achieve with these maps is limited. And so determining whether Suite 100 is within the buffer and Suite 101 is outside of the buffer will be very difficult. And so from a practical implementation standpoint, the simplest thing would be to rule out the entire parcel. But certainly, given the limited opportunity to operate, there may be drawbacks to that as well.
Right. I mean, like, take, for example, Valimar, the southernmost portion of the Valimar commercial area, if you had a 1,000-foot buffer, it's just like the little bit of it's just like a couple stores at the very, very tip of it, Anyway, so that's something that we're going to have to grapple with. And we're probably going to have to be consistent, over time in terms of our application. So, for example, what you're suggesting of, if it cuts through a significant portion of the shopping center, for example, the simplest and easiest application of that would be to rule it out entirely. Otherwise, it's not going to be, we open ourselves up to some kind of litigation possibly by being sort of willy-nilly about it, Anyway, that's just an issue for us to be aware of.
Thank you. Commissioner Evans.
Thank you, Chair. This question might be a little premature, but for down the road a ways, is there any tools in here for the police department to recover money that they've used in manpower for extra security or extra investigations? Or I'm not trying to say it's going to happen, but if one place continually comes up and is having a problem, and our police department has to focus a lot of its time into that area, I was just wondering if there was some way to recoup that cost through the business.
So yes, the city and the police department can recover all costs related to enforcement of the program and issuance of the license and permit. So that would include inspections, enforcement, other police
whatever might come up. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Behringer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is kind of a further question on the issue that Commissioner Cooper brought up. I'm confused about how you sequence the application. I kind of assumed that when they would come before us, that they would already be approved by the police department. So we would be dealing with an individual or a group who would be a viable candidate to operate all they're trying to do is secure a location from which to operate. But you were saying that they're are they parallel and they end at the same time?
I did say that. However, the way we envision it, and Nira can jump in because I know she's drafting that part of the ordinance right now, is that before an application for a use permit is made, somebody would be vetted through the police licensing process, and it wouldn't be issued, it would be held until they finish the use permit process.
Okay.
So part of our application checklist will be that they've been fingerprinted and reviewed by the police department.
That's good, because I would hate to think that we'd waste a lot of time and public notice on a candidate who couldn't pass the vetting by the police department. So that will be in the ordinance then?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I just had one question to add to the questions of my colleagues. Maybe it's one question in a couple parts. I understood that we could, in fact, add additional uses besides the schools, the daycare, and the youth centers if we were so inclined. I was just wondering if, at an anecdotal level, you could sort of speak to the impact if we were to add places of worship. I mean, that's something of some concern to me, just in terms of, thinking through, particularly the recreational aspect of this. With recognizing again that I haven't asked for this kind of analysis prior to now, but at an anecdotal level, do you have a sense of what that might do in terms of the availability of commercial space?
My initial gut feeling is that it may not have a significant impact. I think what I would say to any addition to the list of uses is that there's a need for staff to be able to readily identify these uses and to have an appropriate standard. So a large Catholic church is very easy to identify and define, but the informal group that meets to worship in someone's home or in a commercial location, for example, which happens, is much more difficult to identify and define. And so,
not unlike the sort of the family daycares that you're talking about.
Similar, exactly, except that they don't require a license, and so there's no ready state agency identifying where those places of worship are located. So I would strongly suggest that if we were to add anything, that we have a clear definition, and it's something that staff believes it could rely upon to actually identify these businesses in a reliable way.
Okay. Well, that's something that's of some concern to me. Again, I think that that's a sensitive use, at least in my perspective, that ought to be considered. Commissioner Cooper.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up. Thanks, Chair. I'd like to follow up with Commissioner Niblin's comments. Is some of the businesses, like the tutoring center that's out in the back of the valley, I mean, it would be very unfortunate to have, a dispensary open up right next to it where children are walking in and out of that facility, all day long. maybe a different type of restriction, not a 600-foot restriction, but maybe a different type of restriction to protect those businesses. I could see a dentist's office, medical office. I mean, certain things that I don't think people want to see their children to pass as they go next door to that business, and I think it might hurt the other businesses as well. So I'm not sure from the commission standpoint of what that restriction would look like, but I certainly think there's some other ones besides worship centers, which is obviously a good restriction, that we could maybe put something in there that protects those businesses as well.
Excellent.
Chair, if I could respond, staff acknowledges that there are many other uses that may be considered sensitive. I think what we're advising against or recommending against is adding them to a strict buffer. So if there are uses that are considered sensitive, and in addition to that, distances that are acceptable or unacceptable, we would, I think, ask that those be added as parts of the findings for the discretionary permit, for example.
Yeah.
And so those could inform the commission's analysis of a particular application. And then weigh all of the merits and, drawbacks to a particular applicant in a particular location, and allow us to build evidence and drill down with a detailed analysis at that time, as opposed to a very rough, very coarse tool with an outright buffer.
Okay. Well, I see we've got a couple more questions here. I certainly do want to get to the portion of the item where we're hearing from the public and then to deliberation. But we'll go ahead and take the last couple of questions before we move to that. So, Commissioner Behringer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one quick one. This has come up before. Perhaps, one way we could attack that situation is to have a larger radius for noticing for purposes of the CUP. I know it's come up in connection with other matters. The council's raised it. There was a discussion regarding perhaps having a 500-foot noticing radius for projects. Perhaps this would be a good one to add to that list, because that would pick up some additional area. And then if anybody within that radius had an issue or wanted to participate in the discussion, they would be adequately noticed and they could do that. So maybe that's one way to deal with that.
Thank you. Commissioner Gordon.
Sure, thanks, Chair. Following on Commissioner Cooper's comment about identifying other areas for, like, for example, the tutoring center, and I'm sensitive to your comment about, hey, you don't want to just add more and more uses to this buffer zone so that it's totally unworkable. My question is kind of two-part. First of all, once we're at the discretionary permitting stage, would we be, in order to make our findings, would we be, for example, if we had something in the ordinance that said it's the intent of the ordinance to discourage placements of retail outlets in places that are frequented, in places that are frequented by children, for example, it wouldn't necessarily be captured in a buffer zone per se, but it would be something in the ordinance that once we're at the discretionary stage, trying to figure out whether to approve a discretionary permit, we could fall back on and say, well, this is this would be like 2 stores down from a tutoring center, therefore this is not a great idea, and we would have some backing because it would be somewhere maybe in the preamble to the ordinance or something like that. I don't even know.
And what I would suggest is we could potentially call it a different thing. So we're talking use permit, but it could be a marijuana business permit, and would have its own findings. And so those can be different, include typical use permit findings, but also include other findings, which will be spelled out in the ordinance and very easy for an applicant to see and read when they're researching a potential site for their business.
Okay.
Commissioner Campbell.
My question goes to the existing non-licensed dispensary or retail establishments in town. Are they grandfathered in? And let me just pose an example or a hypothetical. If, let's say tonight we were to say that testing facilities or non-retail facilities were a good fit for C1, C2, and C3 commercial areas. but that retail facilities were only a good fit for C3 areas. I know that there's already an existing retail facility in a C1, or maybe it's a C2 area in Rockaway. Is that facility in? I mean, is it already something that?
So no, there are no grandfathering provisions that would apply to existing medical marijuana dispensaries, even if those dispensaries comply with the CUA, MMPA, and MCRSA. We have Court of Appeal decisions that directly address that point that are published and establish that there can be no grandfathering in permissive zoning jurisdictions such as Pacifica.
Thank you very much.
Well, I think at this point, then, we're going to move on to taking comment from the public in this portion of the study session. I do have one card here from Cheryl King, and perhaps, Ms. King, you could come forward now. And my recollection, we have 3 minutes, then. Is that it? Excellent.
Good evening. I've been here twice before, and I came as Cheryl King, the MFTI, a psychotherapy intern. I spoke to you, told you stories about how I guided my clients who are trying to ease their suffering with pain. But tonight, I'm going to speak to you as a former licensed child care provider. I was one on Pedro Point for 14 years. I spent 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, with 6 children. And they ranged in age from newborns all the way up to through age 12. So that's my experience with children. And then I also had the Academy of Dance at the Sanchez School for 7 years during that time. So I was working with children in that capacity too. So I'm sensitive to where children can be. I want you to know that the dispensary named Surefire is extremely strict with who can walk through the door. And the chief of police can verify what I say, because he sent 2 officers there to check over Surefire to see about getting a license, what can be done. And the staff wouldn't let them in because they didn't have cannabis cards. So they're very strict. Not just anybody can go in. And not just anybody wants in, because it's a medical marijuana dispensary. And the typical customer looks just like me. They're senior ladies who are going there for cannabis spray. That's the #1 item that's being sold. So I hope that you get a different idea, that it's not such a horrible place. I will admit that as a therapist, when I've gone to Vacaville Mental Hospital at the prison, that there are children in the visitation room with criminals, with perverts, and there's only 2 guards there guarding 200 people, visitors and inmates. So children go to a lot of places, but they're not getting into a dispensary that's properly carding everybody. That's just a thought. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Next, then, we'll have Ian Butler, followed by Holly Smalley.
Yeah, hi. I want to say I looked through the staff report, and I really appreciate the changes that have been made from the joint study session staff report. It seems like we're getting to something that's a little closer to what I think would be a rational kind of a policy. And I think that the idea of having any more restrictions than what the state requires, I think is kind of a foolish thing to do. There's other ways of dealing with, if you want to have other vetting process going on. I think we need to keep it simple. For all the reasons listed in the staff report, and another reason that's not listed, and that is that a lot of landlords are reluctant to have one of those establishments in their building. So even if we allow this to happen and the restrictions aren't there, even then we may not be able to get very many places where we're allowed to have somebody. I don't think Kimco's ever going to allow anything in their places, for instance. So we got to be really careful not to be too onerous on our restrictions, because we're going to put a lot of money into a ballot measure. If we put this money into a ballot measure to get this tax revenue, and then there's no tax revenue because you don't have any dispensaries in town, we've wasted a lot of effort on nothing, you know. So that's an important thing to consider. Also, I don't know if we're going to be considering allowing on-site consumption, but I would highly recommend that be allowed. But if you do want to like get down to the weeds and have more restrictions, you can have more restrictions for on-site consumption. That would be a great example of a kind of a place where you'd want to have full ACA access, full compliance. I think the regular dispensaries, just the state minimum for ACA compliance should be just fine. But if you want access for people that have medical needs, it's on-site consumption that they need to be able to have access to, and I would think they need to have the ACA to the full extent possible. Other stuff, also, I like the fact that you recommend allowing backyard growing, but behind a fence with a lock. I think that's all perfectly reasonable restrictions. You also mentioned having an alarm, and I think that's going overboard. I don't think you need to have an alarm to have plants growing in your backyard. That's just kind of goofy, I think. But the other stuff seems perfectly reasonable. What else? But the other part about allowing in the backyards, by the way, is that one of the reasons why we do have crime associated with drugs is that people, if they get their plants stolen, they can't actually call the police because they know that that plant that was stolen is illegal, and they're a criminal as well. So if you allow the backyard growing, then if somebody does steal something, they know that the owner can call the police, and the police will be on their side and actually will help prosecute that. And I think, you know, Prohibition taught us that that's important to allow that to be into the light. So I guess that's all I have time for. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. Holly Smalley.
City Council, thanks for having this meeting this evening.
Mic down.
Yes, a little short.
Thank you.
I like what someone had mentioned about like signage and how we can do things to design what we want our community to look like. This weekend I took my nieces surfing, and on our way back we were passing a huge billboard about 420, some festival coming up. My niece is 12 years old, and she's kind of sassy, and she was like, "Hey, Auntie, want to take us?" I was blown away that she knew what 420 meant in any reference. I was shocked. I was like, "Are you kidding me?" You know, and I hope what we had was a really healthy conversation about the choices I hope she makes in her life, the ones I expect she'll make in her life. So I get signage. In a dispensary, we could design it to look safe, like CVS or like Macy's. You know, someone goes into a building, they spend some time in there, then after some point in time, they leave the building, they get in their car, and they go away, or they ride with someone if they've used or whatever. It doesn't have to be that we have anything glaring and obscene where, I get it, we don't want the kids to be walking back from school and think, oh, marijuana leaves everywhere, and think it's cool, or desensitize them to what that might be because we're concerned about their lives. I get that. My niece doesn't say, hey, take me to the beer festival. She's used to the Coors Light signs on the freeway, but marijuana leaves and dispensaries, they're kind of glamorous in a devious way, and kids they want to experiment with having those conversations. They're curious, and that is the big elephant in the room. We're all a little bit uncomfortable with it, but like Cheryl mentioned, most of the people that come into the dispensary have arthritis. People come from Stanford through chemotherapy, and they can't eat, they can't sleep, they're in pain. This isn't meant to, I don't know, I kind of adore the medical side of it. I think the recreational is beautiful because we can take the tax revenue and do neat things with our city. It's really hard to find a place to rent at Pacifica. On any given day on Craigslist, you might find 1 to 2 places that are even available for commercial use. And then say, hey, what about a medical dispensary? Everyone will tell you no. Don't worry about Eureka Square and splitting that up. They'll never rent. They're super anti, apparently. We've called them all. And state licensing is 600 feet from a licensed school, K through 12, or a licensed rec center. But the toddler center, there's a toddler center directly almost across the street, maybe 300, 400 feet from Surefire. And if we adopted that, I believe we'd have to close. There's nobody using drugs outside. There's no exposure. People park their car, they go inside. You can't tell what it is. People leave. That's it. If we had appropriate signage and we designed it as such, if we had no one's using outside, no one's smoking joints, no one's even eating a brownie in the parking lot, then there's no real risk, because I get it, because right now I truly think kids walking home from school and buying a big gulp at 7-Eleven might have more exposure to addictive substances than a dispensary and walking by. You can't tell what's inside. You don't know what they're doing. We let our kids go to restaurants and bars with us, not bars, but restaurants where we're drinking, and I get it, I care about the kids too, but I think that we could be creative. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Smalley. Next, we'll have Tony, followed by Mary Beer.
Hello, good evening. How are you tonight? I was looking at the map that was given out tonight, and I just had a question, and maybe you could answer it. I saw one commissioner asking questions. We do have some existing medical marijuana dispensaries now since 2010. And it's been a number of years, and I haven't heard any information on what that operation has been, what have been the calls for service from any public safety people to that location. I mean, it exists. Let's not close our eyes and pretend there's some liability issue. If it's there, let's hear a report about it. And where are those locations? They're not indicated anywhere here in the map. Are any of those locations in violation of the buffer zone, the existing buffer zone that the state recommends? Because we know we have one on Palmetto, we know we have one at Rockaway. You know, we're all adults in here. Let's look at this in the adult fashion. I know there may be some legal concerns or what have you, but let's at least explore that a little bit better if we have the existing operations. And then you're starting to hear the questions regarding consuming. People are starting to discuss, will there be places that I can go to smoke my marijuana? Well, I've already heard discussions from one particular dispensary that they've already purchased a piece of property with the hopes of that being allowed someday. So I think those, once you start opening the door to the 5 existing areas of marijuana distribution, cultivation, and what have you, you're going to see consuming eventually. So be prepared for that. And which city staff is going to be tasked with actually going around and looking to see whose backyards are in compliance with a fence and an alarm? You're already starting to hear people saying, an alarm, is that too much? Are people really going to invest in that? And if it's on renter's property, the owner of that property going to be responsible for installing everything in compliance with it so their occupants can grow marijuana in the backyard? You've heard numerous people tell you how unsafe this is to have personal cultivation. We had an actual homicide there in Colorado that was highly discussed, where a 15-year-old child was shot and killed while trying to take someone's marijuana from their backyard by the homeowner. And the second child that was with him is paralyzed for life. Those are the conditions that your regulations are going to set up. So please be smart about it. You've heard the chief of police say how dangerous it is. You've heard the lawyers from Colorado who actually wrote some of the legislation tell you how dangerous it is and they prohibit it. And unanimously on March the 6th, everybody here sat and said, oh, it sounds good to us. Let's go ahead and move forward. I'm sorry, but the lives of our children are at stake. And if people aren't going to act responsible with this product, I think you should ensure that those conditions do not exist. And I certainly hope public safety is never negated because of potential revenues on taxes. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Beer, followed by Donna Wagner.
Hello, good evening. My name is Mary Beer. I'm the director of the Pacifica Prevention Partnership, which is a drug-free community support program through Jefferson Union High School District. It's a mouthful, I know. I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm very happy to see the maps. Thank you very much. I think the buffer zones are incredibly important. I would push for the 1,000 feet buffer zones because that's what the people in prevention push for, right? I do want you to know that I've been at all of the schools in the past week talking about this. And so a lot of our school administrators are very curious about your maps, and they want to see them, and they want to talk with you. Not all of them obviously could be here tonight, but they are interested in talking with you about how they feel about these establishments opening up only 600 feet away from their schools. So I want you to be really mindful about that. Also, some of the conversations we've been having are about the increase in THC in the edibles, right? And how extremely dangerous the edibles are for our kids. And a couple of youth at Oceana today were talking about the experiences they had when they ate too much and had to be taken away by ambulance. So we need to also be mindful about the products that are being sold, where they're being sold, and how, if we open up, I don't know how many places you guys are going to decide to open up here in Pacifica, but last I heard you were looking at either 3 or maybe 6. And the more places that we have, it increases the access. And so it's my hope that whoever gets a license to sell retail marijuana in our community will also work very closely with our prevention partnerships to make sure that none of those products get in the hands of our kids, because that's like the most important thing. So thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Beer. Donna Wagner, followed by Brett Chapman.
Hello and thank you. My name is Donna Wagner. I live right around the corner from Surefire Dispensary. I've lived there for 17 years. I'm also a neonatal nurse, for 40 years. Babies and children have been my life's work. I also am a medical marijuana user, being a woman of a certain age who doesn't sleep anymore. And I can truthfully say that being a client of the clinic around the corner from me, I have seen nothing because it's very well regulated. I can't get in without a card. And any other dispensary I've ever been to has been the exact same way. Kids can't get in. No one can get in unless you're totally vetted. And in my neighborhood, we're very nosy about what goes on my street. I've never seen anybody hanging around. I've never seen inappropriate smoking outside the dispensary. I've never seen people hanging on their cars, because immediately if I do, I go out and ask who they are, because my street's been an issue a couple years ago with heroin. I understand that you have an enormous responsibility to keep Pacifica safe, and I totally appreciate that because I'm on that side. I also think that we need to be responsible adults and treat a medical clinic as a medical clinic, because this is what it is. And again, it's a messy subject. There's so many ups and downs and feelings and emotions, as well as cold hard facts. So it's not an easy fix, but I'm really hoping that we can consider all the options and make it good for everybody, especially those of us who rely on this for our medication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Brett Chapman, followed by Karina Cardenas.
Good evening, guys. I was just curious. I was looking at state law, and I saw that it pertained to the 600-foot buffer to schools, kindergarten, middle school, and high school, but I didn't see where it pertained to daycare centers, and I think it was only state-licensed schools, in fact. And I was just wondering if there's anywhere it's written where pertaining to daycare centers. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Karina Cardenas, please.
I'm owner-operator at Manor for Pharmaceuticals, and my only question is if we're going to allow more than one location per district. For example, Palmetto. I know Rockaway is the only one there. I'm the only one on Manor, but there's more than one on Palmetto, which I'm sure is an issue that a couple of people want to know about. And if we can get a map that's a little more zoned in, or zoomed in, to see exactly where I fall in the map. That's about it.
Thank you. Well, that's all the speaker cards I have. Was there anybody else who wanted to speak? All right, well, I guess then we'll close this part of the study session and bring it back to the commission. And maybe the best way to proceed, at least would be my thought, and see what my colleagues think. On page 10 of the staff report and page 213 of the packet, there are a number of questions under section 5, Planning Commission feedback. And I was thinking perhaps as a starting point, we might run through these questions either one at a time, or maybe we could just ask commissioners to address each of the questions and just sort of go down the line. I don't know if there's a thought on the most efficient way of doing that.
I think if you make them answer them in all at once, each commissioner? I think you'll get a quicker response. rather
Okay, why don't we
than
do that then?
contemplating over each one.
And I'm just going to take the liberty of starting with Commissioner Clifford down at the end there.
Okay. Shall the city incorporate into its ordinance the state prohibitions relating to alcohol and tobacco retailers? And I would say yes to that. Shall the city incorporate into the ordinance the state prohibition relating to 600-foot buffer from certain uses or establish a different buffer distance? At this point in time, I'm in favor of staying with the 600-foot buffer. In terms of additional uses, just looking at the buffer map, I am concerned that if we put too many more additional uses, that we'll wind up not having any place that we can actually locate any of these businesses. Shall all marijuana businesses be subject to a discretionary permit? Yes. Is there a preference to regulating marijuana retailers within existing zoning districts, C1 and C2, or overlays? I actually think I would prefer the overlays.
I think there are a few more questions on the next page, sorry.
Here we go. Should manufacturing facilities be allowed within C3 zones? Yes. Should testing facilities be allowed within C2 zones? Yes. Are there any other considerations to be made when considering a marijuana business? Well, there are some other considerations. One, we've heard people talking about medical dispensaries and how secure they are with the card entry and all that. But we are also considering recreational marijuana facilities, and they're not going to have that limit on people coming in terms of any adult coming to the store can come in. So it's something to consider that the card isn't necessarily a preventive measure on people entering some of the facilities we're talking about. Are the standards for outdoor cultivation, screening, security, and buffer appropriate? They're appropriate. I'm not sure how they're going to be enforced, except if somebody actually complains. If somebody sees somebody's marijuana plants in their backyard, then they can be called into
Complaint-driven.
Complaint-driven, and it would probably wind up being code enforcement that would start something like that. So that's where I'm at on that. And that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Clifford. Commissioner Gordon.
Thank you, Chair. Let's see, okay, first bullet point, shall the city incorporate into, do I need to read all these before I censor? Probably not. So first bullet point, yes. Second bullet point, 600 feet is okay with me. Third bullet point, what uses in addition to those in state law should be considered when locating a marijuana business? I guess that's where I'd place my comment that it doesn't have to go into the buffer zone per se, but something in the ordinance that says that, to the extent possible, the location of marijuana retail outlets should be discouraged where there is a significant foot traffic of kids under the age of fill in the blank, I don't know, 16 or something like that. I don't know, something just to, when we're at something so that when we're at the discretionary permit stage, we can point to it and say, this is a problem. Anyway, fourth bullet point, should all marijuana businesses be subject to a discretionary permit? Yes. The fifth bullet point, I'm in favor of the overlay zone. Sixth bullet point, Yes. Seventh bullet point, yes. Eighth bullet point, any other considerations to be made when considering a marijuana business? One of the speakers mentioned the concern about having a large number of retailers, and I think that's a consideration, is just how many we want in the city. I remember the last study session, we were talking about, well, on the one hand, you can let the market decide how many outlets the city can handle, but that's a process that could take time, 18 months or something like that, or even a couple of years. I don't know if I want to do that. So I would be in favor of, and maybe that's covered if we have the overlay zone approach, where we could really say, okay, let's limit the number in the city to, a certain amount. I would be in favor of having no more than 3, personally. But anyway, that's a consideration, is the number, and obviously we can drill down at another point. The final bullet point, the standards for outdoor cultivation. I think the pool spa standard is a little bit too much for me. I would say, yeah, you got to have it in the backyard, and that's all I would require. I think having an alarm is too much. I don't even think fencing is necessarily need to be required. This is, I just think growing marijuana is for personal cultivation in your backyard, is going to become a lot more normal in going forward. The state's made it legal. I think, we're in a transition period, and we got to get used to that, but I think it's going to be not going to be such a big deal as we go forward. So I'm in favor of just putting it in the backyard.
Thank you, Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Campbell.
All right. Shall the city incorporate in its ordinance the state prohibitions relating to alcohol and tobacco? Yes. Shall the city incorporate the 600-foot buffer or something more? That really kind of depends on where we go with the overlays and the zoning, and I just want to speak on that for just a moment. A couple things. First, I know we have to accommodate the marijuana businesses as they come into town, because it's allowed by the state law now. But I also think we really need to be careful about accommodating the existing businesses in town. And I think we really need to be careful about the element of surprise for existing businesses, and we need to accommodate existing businesses that may not want to be located next to these types of facilities. I think it's going to be important going forward, and also neighborhoods. I think that there's a lot of people who, I think this is going to be it'll be shocking if we allow dispensaries, for example, in C1 and C2. I'm not entirely persuaded by the example of Surefire and the other medical dispensaries right now, because they've been quiet for sure, but they've also had to lay low. And I think that once the full commercial aspects of selling non-medical and medical marijuana are apparent, it'll make no business sense to stay that way. And so I think they're going to get, there'll be a lot more trafficked. And I think that traffic is going to be pretty surprising to folks in town if you're in a C1 and C2 areas. This is for the retail only. I'm not talking about the other types of uses. And as far as signage goes, I'm unconvinced that we can get at the, I forget who brought it up, the obnoxious signage. If history's a guide, we haven't had a ton of success with that already. And I'll give you an example. The smoke shops in town are pretty obnoxious. And I don't know who was around when we talked about the smoke shop in the Pedro Point Shopping Center, but we had a heck of a time bringing that fog zone sign down to something. And you start to get into, constitutional issues real quick when you start to regulate someone's signage differently than someone else's signage. So they can get big. That said, so that comes back to, should we have the 600 or 1,000-foot buffer? if we don't have stringent overlay or we don't regulate the C1, C2, if we don't make distinctions about what's going in the C1 and C2 and C3 zoning areas, I'd go for 1,000 based on the map here, and I know it's not super to scale, but the 1,000-foot would at least pick up the little slivers of shopping center areas that Commissioner Gordon discussed were problematic and make it cleaner. Because I do think you want businesses on both sides of the fence to have a lot of certainty about where they can locate. And so if you leave a little sliver of a shopping center area as someplace they could maybe tuck something into the corner there, I think that's more problematic than just like saying it's not allowed in that shopping center. So I would go with 1,000, but it depends. So what uses, in addition to those in state law, should be considered when locating a marijuana business? I'm sensitive to the house of worship situation. I don't know how we get at that necessarily. I was thinking maybe if there's a facility that is getting an actual, that's actually designated as a non-tax area or something like that, maybe we could do
some
that.
form of welfare or religious use exemption by the county assessor. I mean, that's actually quite.
Right, so it gets
I
away.
wouldn't say it's easy, but it's something you can, it's available.
So yeah, thank you, and it gets away from the whole issue of, well, someone's, just meeting in their, in the shopping center or meeting at someone's house. Should all marijuana businesses be subject to discretionary permit? Yes. Is there a preference to regulate marijuana retailers within existing zoning districts or overlay zones? I think the overlay zones could make a lot of sense because I do think that, and this goes to the retail aspects and the dispensary aspects, I think those are uses that we probably want to locate in shopping areas that can handle the traffic. And so I'm thinking Fairway, I'm thinking Lindemar, maybe Rockaway since we've already got one. But other than that, if the overlay is not going to work, then I would say retail should not be allowed in C1 or C2. It should be allowed in C3, which allows actually some significant possibilities in town, especially in North Palmetto, perhaps the Quarry at some point, and there's like a little sliver out in the Lindemar area. But then as far as the other uses that we're talking about, the non-retail aspects, those could go in C1, C2, and C3. I don't see a problem with that because it's not going to have the traffic. And you're accommodating the state requirement that we allow these uses. So I think hopefully we will run afoul of this notion that we are boxing out all types of facilities.
Well, there's no requirement I'm aware of in state law that we allow marijuana businesses. It's a policy decision that the city council communicated at the study session that it seemed willing to entertain these types of uses, but the city could very well ban outright all marijuana-related businesses.
Right. Well, yeah, I think we could do that, and I went to a conference on marijuana legalization myself, CLE, and I know that there was some dispute about that, but I mean, just, attorneys talking about the constitutionality of that. But yes, I agree right now. That's a possibility. Where was I? Should manufacturing facilities be allowed within the C3 zones? Yes. Should testing facilities be allowed within the C2 zone? Yes. Are there any other considerations to be made when considering marijuana business? I think I just expressed them. And are the standards for outdoor cultivation appropriate? I do kind of agree that it's probably going to get more common to have marijuana growing outside, and it's going to be hard to police, probably setting ourselves up for failure to require the fencing and the alarm systems. But I do know of at least one instance where we did have so much growing in a backyard that the scent of it actually got to a point where it did factor into the considerations that made someone move. So, that's something that we'd probably need to, I don't know how we get at that. It's probably a code enforcement thing, but that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the public for coming out. I think that the input's always welcome, and I think it certainly has a lot of impact on the commissioners and what we decide up here. I'll just go through the questions. Shall the city incorporate its ordinance to state provisions related to alcohol? Yes. I'm okay with the 600-foot buffer zone. I think that's appropriate. I think it's also appropriate to limit the K-12 schools, daycare centers, and youth centers. I think that's appropriate as well. Discretionary permit, absolutely. I am okay with having retailers in a C2 zone. I'm not that opposed to it. I think if they're properly labeled, if they're properly done, I would agree with some of the speakers out here that you wouldn't even, you would know that they're there, but they wouldn't be, you know, the giant green marijuana leaf sitting out in front. They'd be discreet, which will bring me to the restrictions on the other one. I'll code those in a second. Should manufacturing facilities be allowed within the C3 zone? Again, I'd limit that to, again, the difference between manufacturing a product and processing marijuana. I don't believe that we should be processing within the city limits, but I certainly think that we should allow manufacturing of goods within the city limits. Testing facilities allowed in C2 zone. I don't see why not. Are there any other restrictions in considering marijuana businesses? I think we should have restrictions on the graphics and the labeling of the products. I think that is, I've seen some really awful things out there for dispensaries, but I also have seen some really nice dispensaries that actually are very nice to the community. They improve the building. You wouldn't know they're there. Great parking. I think they should be allowed in that C2 commercial zone where there is parking and they can get to the facilities, and it allows that ease of use. I also think there probably should be a proximity restriction amongst the dispensaries, that not being too close to one another. I think that would be a good overlay within the zone. I would like to comment on the existing facilities. I personally don't want to reward poor behavior, and so I don't think there should be any grandfather clause into any existing facility. If they don't comply, they don't comply. If that's just part of business, and I don't think they should be grandfathered in, and it's just a personal opinion of mine. The outdoor cultivation, you know, I hear both sides of it. I don't want to be a city that a 15-year-old goes into a backyard and picks a plant and gets beaten on by somebody, and I don't think it's that important that we have outdoor cultivation. So at this point in time, I'm going to say I would like the prohibition against outdoor cultivation.
Chair, excuse me, Chair, if I could just seek clarification of Vice Chair Cooper's comments. You made a couple references to retail and dispensary uses in the C2 zone. Was that meant to exclude the C1 zone from consideration?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cooper. Commissioner Evans.
Thank you, Chair. About the, shall the city incorporate the ordinance about the alcohol and tobacco retailers? Yes. 600 foot is fine, I think, currently. What are the uses? I think the discretionary permitting will take care of that third bullet point. At least I hope so. And then definitely on discretionary permit, the retailers within zoning, overlay zones. Should manufacturing facilities be allowed in C3? Yes, but also previously stated limited. I don't want to cause more action by our fire department for any reason. Should testing facilities be allowed in C2 zones? Yes. Are there any other considerations to be made considering marijuana? Signage. I mean, we limit signage in the front windows of our 7-Eleven stores. Why can't we limit signage in this? So definitely signage. I think it should be very low-keyed. People who are looking for that sort of retailer will know that it's there. So signage. And also the too close. I know it probably won't happen, but I don't want to become the car row for marijuana, dispensaries. standards for outdoor cultivation. I'm with previous commissioner. I don't want to see more trouble, and outdoor cultivation, I think, could cause that. So I'm against outdoor cultivation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Evans. Commissioner Behringer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bullet point 1, yes. Bullet point 2, I'd like to see a 1,000-foot radius. Bullet point 3, what?
I couldn't hear you, so you got to talk to the microphone.
Do you want me to go over?
No, that's fine.
Okay. 1,000-foot radius, I'd like to see that. In terms of what uses in addition, we had talked once before about treatment centers, addictive treatment centers. I think those should be added. I know Commissioner Clifford was pretty adamant about that last time we talked. I firmly believe that all businesses should be subject to a discretionary permit. I would like to see a 5 or a 10-year fuse on that discretionary permit. I would like to have it expire on a date certain and make them come back and reapply. I'd like to see an overlay zone. I think that might go a long way toward working out where we can put it in terms of C1, C2, and C3. Should manufacturing facilities be allowed in C3 zones? Yes. Should testing facilities be allowed in C2 zones? Yes. Are there any other considerations? Number one, I want to make sure that whoever the applicant is, that they are completely vetted by the PD before they come before us. I would like to have a prohibition on on-site consumption. I think, at least for the initial round of facilities, I think that's important. And I'd like to see a radius from the front door for a prohibition of consumption 150, 200 feet. You guys come up with something that you think would be appropriate. And yeah, I agree, we can control signage and exterior design. We do that in commercial all the time, and I think it would certainly be appropriate in this situation.
Thank you, Commissioner Behringer. So I'll just work my way through these questions quickly. Shall the city incorporate into its ordinance the state prohibitions relating to alcohol and tobacco retailers? I think yes. Incorporation into the ordinance of state prohibitions related to a buffer. I think I would be in favor of a 1,000-foot buffer as well.
Excuse me, I forgot to have an opinion on outdoor cultivation.
Please, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the police chief was opposed to doing it, and then there was a lot of discussion at the last session about it. I think it's probably okay if someone does it, but I think it's appropriate to have restrictions and security measures on it. I don't think we need alarms on the doors, but I think if we're going to allow people to grow it outside, we need to have some sort of a security so that young people can't hop the fence and steal it. I don't know how you're going to enforce that, but you know, from my perspective, if you require it and someone is remiss in it, and this marijuana gets into the hands of young people, then they should be liable for that, I think. Okay.
Thank you. I'm sorry about that. I was talking about the buffer, and I think a 1,000-foot buffer is appropriate. Uses in addition to those in state law should be considered. I again think that we can come up with a definition of places of worship and add that to the list of things that per se are buffered. I do believe that a discretionary permit, and I think staff had suggested the idea of coming up with sort of a specific permit unique to this kind of use that sort of addresses the particular impacts and mitigation of those particular impacts that are most anticipated given the use we're talking about here. So I would be in favor of that. I think overlay zones would be appropriate. Manufacturing facilities in the C3 zone, yes. Testing facilities in the C2 zones, yes. Any other considerations? I think the idea of buffering between these facilities is appropriate. I don't have in mind a particular sort of buffer distance, but I think that is an appropriate idea. Colleagues have already spoken to signage. Consideration of traffic flow patterns, probably something I'd want to see addressed in the discretionary permit, making sure that parking, those sorts of things that really go to the sorts of impacts that we're likely to see with respect to these kinds of uses. And finally, I'm opposed to outdoor cultivation, period, so I don't really offer an opinion with respect to security. How else can we be helpful to staff at this point?
Do you care to write the ordinance?
I'll take a pass on that. I've got others to write.
I think the feedback was extremely helpful. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
So that He's going to move us then to the part of the agenda reserved for communications. How about staff communications then? I'm sorry, we'll start with commission communications. Do we have any communications from commissioners? Commissioner Evans, it looks like.
Thank you, Chair. It's with heavy heart, I am resigning from the Plan Commission as of the end of May. My wife and I will be moving out of town down south to be closer to family and my grandkids who are growing faster than I can keep up with. So thus, this past 8 years on the Plan Commission and 3 years prior on the Open Space Committee was very enjoyable. I love this position. I feel like I'm actually doing something for the city, and you guys have been great. I think we were just talking earlier about the fact that I think it's a good mix of people up here. So I hope it continues, and stay in touch. So.
Well, it sounds like we'll have one more meeting for accolades.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I can do, I guess we're going to have both meetings in May, or this is the first meeting, so one more meeting, yes. So.
Okay, well, we're still in shock, so we'll take a little time to think of
sorry.
wonderful
Yeah.
things to say about your significant service to the city.
Yeah, sorry.
Excellent. Is there anything that can top that, or any other commissioner? Wow. Staff communications then.
Yeah.
Wanted to let you guys know that we're going to have an updated frequently asked questions sheet regarding the rent stabilization legislative path that we're on. So I think tomorrow it'll be updated on the website, so you can get more information about the interim ordinance that was adopted. And on May 8th, the council will consider placing an ordinance on the November ballot. And we'll also consider whether or not to adopt an urgency ordinance that would take effect sooner than the interim ordinance. And then lastly, the Library Advisory Committee, which we'll have to bring an item back to get a new liaison, but we're moving forward with an outreach plan to the community to decide the future of our libraries. And you'll see a mailer coming out in the next week or so. And the first community meeting will be at IBL on May 23rd.
Thank you. I guess I had one question for the Deputy City Attorney. It occurred to me with respect to the item that we acted on, the consideration item, did I need to read this little issue about folks aggrieved by the action of the Planning Commission having 10 days, calendar days to appeal it?
No, that's okay, since it was in the agenda.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn unless there's anything else. Commissioner Cooper.
All right, I'm still in shock, but I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Sorry.
Okay, Commissioner Behringer.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and vote? It's unanimously approved. We're adjourned. Thank you.
I know.